Do you have a favorite?
Not meant to. But mostly the unloved ones, the unvisited ones, the cases that get dusty and ignored. All the broken and shunned creatures. Someone's got to care for them. Who shall it be if not us?
Yes.
Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the very best new and old ideas for living in this world. Coming to you from 43 degrees south on a small farm in deepest Tasmania. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we welcome to the show producer, singer, songwriter Nika Danilova, aka Zola Jesus. Nika has released 5 albums over the last decade or so, and in 2017 moved back onto family land in Wisconsin and built a cabin in the woods. She also played Dark Mofo down here in Tasmania last year. So we have some overlaps and similarities, particularly around creativity and place, that led to a really fruitful post-materialist discussion of such things. So enjoy. Nika, welcome aboard.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, that it is. And we were talking before I hit the record button that this is a really fun lunar eclipse activity because that's exactly what's going on right now.
Yes, it's cosmic.
Yeah, definitely cosmic.
Really.
All right. Well, first-time guest, traditional first-time question, Nika, and I'm super looking forward to this one. Were you a weird kid?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Such as?
That was my nickname in high
really?
school.
Weird kid?
Or weird. You're weird. They'd be like, you're weird. With that look, where it's like, I don't get you. I don't get it. And then I would just literally hide under my desk. But yeah, I was a weird kid, especially growing up in the woods, and just like, there's just so much freedom when you have that sort of space and privacy that it made me, I think, foster a lot of weirdness that I didn't realize it was weird until like I got to public school, when I was just shamed and bullied into oblivion. So yeah. Yeah,
if you have like an early childhood of a lot of your friends not being human, and then you have to sit in a box with, other humans. It's a bit of a culture shock. Definitely. I mean, was there more to it than that? The thing about living in regional or remote areas is there's kind of less of a societal filter to the high strange. So were there, unusual lights in the sky? Was the family home haunted? That kind of stuff.
It wasn't so like, it wasn't so physical like that. More just, growing up, I kind of like in the wilderness, you're just feeling like the presence of things, like the presence of everything. Not to like, I didn't know what that meant as a kid, but just feeling things that felt natural. You know what I mean? When you're surrounded by nature and you grew up surrounded by nature, you just feel connected to it. So then you just feel a presence of something that pushes you around, and yeah, it feels sort of magical.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a weird answer, but
no, it's a normal answer around here. So I don't think you'll be hiding under the desk because it's weird you mentioned that, because we have someone in common who was on the ayahuasca dieta with me, and she had the same experience as we were sort of coming down from the ayahuasca in the jungle and staggering back to our tumbos, right? Which is the entire thing. You can feel it being alive when you're in forest or jungle or whatever, but it was much more communicative. So yes, like I know exactly what you mean when you are normalized to the idea that things other than humans are people or persons, and you just have that sense of presence. And it's only when you encounter other humans do you realize that actually some of them don't see that.
Totally. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And growing up, I was just like really. Oh, sorry. Can you hear that?
That's great.
My dog is.
Yeah.
Can you hear the dog barking?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. She's very on edge today. because we were home alone for a week, and then my partner came back from a trip, and now she's just like, "What are you doing here?"
I love that they can be that excited.
Bonded.
What's so good about dogs?
Yeah.
Like, whatever happens to them is the best thing that's ever happened. It's so exciting.
I love animals for that reason, and dogs especially, is because it's like you see what you get. You know, you get what you see. Like, you know, they're going to tell you what they're feeling and thinking. And I'm like, thank you for that clarity, because humans are so like convoluted. But anyway, I forgot what we were talking about. We were talking about Matt. What were we talking about before that?
No, we were talking about the kind of like felt presence of the more than human world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Just growing up, feeling things that didn't have a name, and even now I'm searching for the names of the feelings, you know, and searching to understand it, because it's just a hard thing to find other people having that in common, just because it's not we're just so acclimated to living outside of that presence, or tuning it out, or, you know what I mean, just kind of maybe calcifying that like sensory experience as we get older.
Yeah.
Or,
so,
you know,
it's funny you mentioned that, and I don't want to put a heavy responsibility on you, but do you think it's a case in the short term, say, for instance, in our lifetimes, of finding the other people within a quote-unquote Western culture who can do it? Or does it fall to us to kind of, you say you don't really have the words for it. I'm not sure if there are words for it, because the experience is kind of like pre-literate. But do enough of us have to just like live like that and say, hey, this is valid?
Yeah, I don't know. And, you know, that's the thing. I just recently started trying to find the names of the things, and the feelings, because sorry, I'm just gonna let her bark.
Yeah, don't apologize. It's an awesome sound.
Wait, okay. Find the name for. Oh yeah, that's what we're talking about. Because for so long I just felt like, oh, it's this feeling is my imagination. Like, oh, I'm making it up. These things I've made up. You know, things that I felt very sort of sincerely and earnestly as a child. You know, as I grew up, I felt like that wasn't acceptable, or it wasn't real. And so I just, you know, I became much more rational and more science based and more like, more, you know, interested in the empirical evidence of things. But then recently I've just been like, since I moved back to Wisconsin, back to the woods, I've just been trying to figure out what that feeling is, because I feel it again. Being here, and just being constantly surrounded by that presence, and that's kind of how I started listening to your podcast, and also just reading a lot more about maybe magic or occult, or just anything that's more that science isn't giving me for an answer for that.
No, that's well, obviously, I'm on a very similar journey of you kind of. You had to unpick, for sort of acceptability reasons, your initial epistemology and ontology as a kid. And then you kind of, hang on a minute, the one that I've adopted just to kind of get along with everyone is wrong. So what do we do now? And that's been my journey, obviously, the last decade or so of putting it together. But like, I love that you said that, because there's a embodied or non-literate way of doing it. There's a quote when I was putting together the questions for this show. There's something you wrote, and I wish I was diligent enough to work out or remember where you wrote this. But it's when I'm in a sea of endless trees, I feel released of my duty to be a person. I am free. And that kind of really resonated with me. It's too cold now down here, but to be sort of barefoot in my local woods and whatever in the summer when the ground isn't really fucking cold. I'm like, there was something about that feels familiar. So, I mean, can you elaborate on that for us? Because I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. There's... You know, I've been thinking a lot about this feeling of like how when I'm in nature, I feel like my position, my place, my duties or responsibilities are changed, and I fit in better in that ecosystem because it feels more natural. It's like, okay, I am a human within nature that is full of other animals, mammals, fauna, whatever, and so then to think about that, and then sorry, you can edit this out because I'm trying to piece this together.
No, look, I struggle with this as well because this is what I mean about, do you think there's a responsibility if you have the opportunity to live the way we're attempting to live, and it's different, but it's similar.
Yeah.
And we do not have the words for it. And that's the problem.
Well, it's especially since I've been an adult, it's been really hard for me to feel comfortable in a society context or within like a metropolitan civilization. It makes me feel wrong. Like it doesn't align with sort of my like ideology about what it means to be like a human or an animal or be a part of Earth. And so but it's also something that feels sort of discordant because as a human, I should feel like I fit with all the other humans in the world that we've built. But it doesn't feel right. And it's just been feeling worse and worse and worse as I get older and more like abnormal or uncomfortable. And so then trying to figure out like why I feel that way and thinking about my position as within nature, like living within a more natural context or environment, I feel like, I am part of this ecosystem. I play a role within it, and it feels so much more holistic. I feel so much more spiritual, so much more fulfilled just as a person, because I just feel like this is just how things are supposed to be, but humans, whatever happened to us to make us the way we are today, which is extremely opportunistic and, very populous. It's just, I don't know where we went or how we got off the rails and kind of now are trying to conquer the earth in which birthed us. We're trying to pave over that earth and to build our own earth on top of it in this like extremely non-holistic way or symbiotic way. We're trying to reduce the symbiosis of like of our place within this like original world.
Yeah. So there's some nested follow-up questions there. The first is like, because I know exactly what you mean, obviously, but is it easier for us? Like, here's the thing. If one of the things that I think we resonate with is, one, I don't like the term nature because it implies that sort of nature-culture separation. There's sort of no way we're not embedded in the lifeways of the planet, right? It doesn't matter if you're living in a tiny apartment in Hong Kong or on, family land in the woods of Wisconsin. So is it just because it seems to me that the natural, or funny enough, I use that word, the inevitable next steps of how humans live is to recover that sense of being embedded in lifeways wherever we are, even if that is in a city. So that's the first thing. The first sort of nested question is it easier for us in our situation? And the follow-up is, where did we go wrong? Is it recent? Because like I've been lucky enough to travel a fair bit. And if I look at how people outside the Anglosphere live in sort of either extended family groups or small towns or so, and it doesn't seem to be quite as extractive or iconic. So like, is it honestly humans building towns, or is it a more recent hijack of where we went wrong, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, those are two questions that I don't think I can answer in like a fundamentally correct way. But, so the first question is are we living, wait, sorry, what was the first question?
So it's like, you and I have the, well, it's a luxury, but it's also a sacrifice. Like, let's,
right.
It's not just that I think it's easier for me to have that full experience of the more than human world because I live at the edge of a logging town at the edge of the world. And so I could walk out my door into ancient woodlands and I have that experience. Whereas if I was the guy in the apartment in Hong Kong, that is still quote unquote nature, but it's harder for me to experience it. So that was kind of is the solution for us to disperse from megacities, or is it to recover that sense of the more than human is everywhere, even in populous human places? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, of course, and this is another like kind of conundrum within this is everything is nature, you know, everything we make is not technically natural, you know, so cities are natural, and maybe they seem to be natural to us as humans in terms of just how we like, you know, we live very communally and very like, we live in clusters and tribes and stuff, but generally I don't know. Yeah, I could go on. Like I have so many questions about that and about, you know, well then what is nature supposed to look like? What is it supposed to mean? What is it, you know, but then how do we keep that presence alive? What is that thing that I feel that feels alive when I am in a natural wilderness versus when I'm in a city? It feels very not, it doesn't have that feeling, you know, and, you know, if cities were kind of living within that true natural context, I feel like I would have felt that, but it doesn't feel that way. And that's what makes me just thirst to understand the difference between the two, or where we went wrong, or how we went wrong, or why is it wrong, you know? Why is it me? Is it them? Is it, you know, what is it about human civilization that just seems so like antagonistic towards the otherwise natural world?
Yeah, I have grappled and continue to grapple with similar things, and my sort of way into that, and I think you landed on it with, well, what is nature even supposed to look like? Like, I don't know if we get to, it's going to do what it's going to do, and I don't think we get to freeze it like some sort of 19th century cosmic zoo. And for me, when it comes to cities, like the first step is to view the impact as not just loss only, to look at some of the positives. So in the edges of cities, and I have a lot of British research on this, but like 19th century brownfield sites in Essex are the places in the British Isles that have the highest biodiversity, if you include you know, bugs and insects and all that kind of stuff. So when humans build cities, we actually build habitat. And there are sort of wildlife corridors, and because of how and this is a disaster, but like because of how we've changed agriculture, for instance, where we have large open fields that we put poisons on, butterflies in Britain can't fly across these giant new fields over the last 50 years without getting tired and landing and poisoning themselves and dying. So the motorway corridors that have like junk plants on them, like weeds and easy growing, low maintenance trees and so on, are now butterfly corridors because they can land on that stuff and move about. So when there's something Professor Ingold of University of Aberdeen says, that humans don't, if we are animals, which we are, then what we do is build habitat. Like, we don't have homes in cities, we have habitat. And when you build habitat, like if you look at a tree is an organism, but it is habitat at different levels. And if you build a tree house in it, it's your habitat, it's a bug's habitat, it's a bird's habitat, it's a snake's habitat, and it's an organism in and of itself. And for me, it doesn't mean everything's fine, but for me, that's kind of like the way in to how I begin to unpack, like, what do we do? And more like, not like in a broad scale, here's what everyone should do to reorganize their society, but more like, if you live in a city, how do you start thinking with it so you don't go crazy? And for me, it was this notion of not finding the good things that happen, as well as not ignoring the many bad things.
Absolutely. And I'm not against living in cities at all. And, you know, I've lived in them for, you know, my entire adult life for the most part, up until now. But just something doesn't inherently fit for me in a kind of like a philosophical or spiritual context that that may fit for somebody else, but and then I guess just considering cities as habitats that not only for us but for other life to thrive. But when I think, okay, we're just building our habitat, we just happen to raise ground and kind of build everything from scratch instead of working with the world around us more sort of like respectfully.
Yeah, exactly. But like it is a way in to realize that, okay, it's not, I agree completely, but it almost puts legitimacy of humans having habitats back into like the discussion and go, okay, so we are allowed to build cities. It's just we should probably, like, not allowed, but like, I'm not philosophically opposed to cities, but we could probably be doing a better job of it. Yeah.
Totally.
So bringing it back to like being called weird in high school, was this, obviously it's difficult for a high school kid / impossible to articulate it, but was the weird coming from that, or was it coming, do you think your kind of like creative journey is in majority response to this sense of dissonant lifeways, or is the dissonant lifeways like a subset of this sort of wider creative idea?
I mean, I think that everything just stems, whether it's my creative life or who I am as a person or what I like or whatever. It just comes from, I guess it just comes from who I am, And so growing up, I did just feel inherently isolated from people. I was as a child, I was very, as a younger child, I was very like free-spirited and had a lot of energy and was really brave and independent. And then at some point, when I was around 6, I switched and became incredibly, incredibly terrified and disabling. So I couldn't go to school. I couldn't, do a lot of things. I would just have these panic attacks, and I had like autophobia and claustrophobia and a bunch of stuff. And so then that made me weird at school because I, couldn't stay at people's houses, and I would just take off of school because I had panic attacks and stuff. And so, but then just generally, I guess just also just growing up with interests or ideas or, just energy that was just not like always accepted by everybody, in a way that made me feel like normal, like, oh, I'm a normal person.
Do you know what it was? Like, do you have an intimation of what happened at age 6? Like, because it's interesting. That's sort of the beginning of school. So it's your first foray as a human into the structures we inherit. I'm just wondering, like, do you think what it was at age 6 that led to that happening?
Well, my parents have always considered that it was because I was stung in the neck by a bee. Mm-hmm. And that definitely was part of my anxiety. I didn't want to go outside. I was just constantly obsessed with things flying in the air around. You know what I mean? I just was like a very obsessed child. So that could have been it, but then that doesn't seem like enough. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just kind of like,
I don't know.
Weird. I don't know.
Enough? Yeah, I think like if you do, it depends on how you use mushrooms or therapy or whatever. But you will find points in your deep childhood that seem really small to an adult, but can spin off. Because it also could have been chemical, particularly if it's an anxiety response. So I don't know if you're mildly allergic or so on, but your parents may be onto something that it can kind of actually have a chemical alteration as well. It might be that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very weird, and it's something that as an adult, now as a fully secure, independent adult, I forget that as a child I had from 6 until maybe 13 or 14. I just had this crippling anxiety that made it impossible for me to do anything as a normal person would, and then I grew up and became normal, and not normal, but normal functioning in terms of my anxiety. And I was just like, wow, that was vibe, to say it lightly.
Do you think, because I have, my grandmother was classically trained and quite anxious as well. Do you think there's something about classical music training that's very mathematical and very, obviously, but like, how to describe this? It is a map or an opportunity to make the world predictable. There are certain things you can study that are worldviews that are more predictable than not. And do you think that's part of it? Because I mean, otherwise, like, why? It's astonishing, but like, why opera? Why classical training?
Yeah, that's something that I pine for now as like a creative, like, songwriter and producer and, creative artist today. I pine for not having to create and just being able to at most interpret, at best make the composer happy, no matter how long they've been dead for. You know what I mean? So it's binary, and that gave me so much structure, and I liked being able to the art of mastering something. But then at some point my desire to create took over, and then I would rather face the sort of the creative trials and errors than the sort of the analytical ones or the technical ones.
When you say it's binary, do you think it's a spectrum? So, because I'm thinking of, versions, and like Tiger is very accomplished and neat and excellent, and obviously if you look at Okovi, it's astonishing, but it is that kind of it's more internal and messy and glorious and big dark clouds and what have you. But do you think over the course of your career you might be like, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do more like string quartets, or I'm gonna write an opera, and are you going to be playing with that binary between sort of like opening the lid of the unconscious on the world and a really technical, almost like ballet delivery?
Yeah. I mean, Taiga was my attempt at being like, you know what? I'm going to make a record. I'm going to nail it. I'm going to make the best record. And it's not. It's such a subjective thing, though. But to try to anything that I could control to have some sort of like pass-fail scope that I could look at it with, like that was what that was about. And that's what my studies of classical singing was about as well. And so but then, there's just only so much of that I can do before I feel like I'm going to burst open, because I'm not saying necessarily what I want to say or feel, because it's not about that. It's about mastery. It's about feeling like I'm accomplishing something, but then I'm not accomplishing something on an emotional level. And so that's kind of the thing. And so it is a bit of a pendulum swinging back and forth with every record that I make. Everything that I do in life is about the finding a balance between those two extremes of just, complete like sophistication on one end, or elegance or grace. And then on the other end, it's just like that primal, aggressive, like, sort of just overwhelming spill of feelings and emotions that are just never clean or clear.
Yeah, it's. I was thinking about it, obviously, in preparation for this interview. But it's as I said, deep winter down here, and so when the rain breaks, I go for walks along the beach. Like, and it's the Southern Ocean; it's cold. Like, Antarctica is a neighbor, and so like it occurred to me when Tiger came out, it was driving music. When James and I were driving around Britain in the winter, like Cumbria and so on, we did a lot of driving tours, and it's something about roads and built environment that matches that it is accomplished and technical. But Okovi is really, really good, like walking by a Southern Ocean beach in the middle of winter with the wind going, and I'm like, oh wow, this I sort of had a physical experience of the differences between them, and that's why it feels like a pendulum for me. Like, are you going to write an opera for us next? I think that is it's a mark of someone who's obviously particularly talented at music, that you can do almost like a ballet delivery and whatever a covey is, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that I struggle with though is just that feeling like I'm never being consistent. Because, you know, I think there are some people that have a style or they have this artistic voice that is very specific. Not that I don't, but, you know, some people like pop that are fans of what I make, and some people like industrial and noise, you know? I like both. Some like both. Some like one or the other. And so I feel like I'm just always disappointing either one side of myself
Sure.
or one side of my audience. I just feel like I'm never fully being like, yep, I'm doing that thing that I do. I'm doing the thing. Like, this is that. Whereas, you know, I'm constantly like, okay, I'm going to go 25% this vibe and the rest that vibe, and, you know, hope everyone's happy in the end, including myself, you know, but, yeah.
See,
so I don't know.
I don't know. Like, I think that I think maybe you've got the right strategy, which is mild disappointment of 50% of people, including yourself, each time. Because if
everyone's disappointed, and like including me, they're all like, "This sucks." Like,
well, because the other option is if you look at, say, you know, an actual pop star. And they'll get 15, 20 years into their career and go insane because all they've done is pop. And they're like, but I have other things. And people, you know, sell out concerts where they're like, no, Ariana, we really just want the pop, honey. And so I don't know. I think you can inoculate yourself and your listeners by just like mildly disappointing half of them by penduluming. And then eventually they'll learn.
Yeah. I try really hard to not disappoint, but I know that inevitably, almost everyone's going to be at least a little bit like, oh, it could have been 35% in that one direction, or 50%, you know? I'm like, okay, it is what it is.
And it's not just restricted to music. That happens to me with books. That happens to everyone. I think
absolutely.
It's the role.
Absolutely.
But this is sort of related because we are talking about, and I don't want to call it a binary because maybe it is, or I mean, I don't want to call it a spectrum because maybe it is. It does feel more like a pendulum swing between these two modes, right? But I know musicians get asked this all the time, and I want to kind of ask the question in a twisted way. Not like what were your inspirations, but two inspiration-ish questions, which is, do inspirations change over time? Is one. And do you know what they are in advance or only in retrospect? Because I can answer that from a writing perspective, but I'd like to hear it from a music perspective.
Inspiration changes with every project, I think, for me. But there are some things that are just a core of who I am that will carry through everything that I do, because that's just the voice, that's the intent, and that's like the drive that keeps me sort of like searching through music. But and then the second question was,
do you know what they are in advance?
Sorry, that's right. Yeah. Sometimes I operate in this way where I discover the inspiration before I make the thing, and then everything is painted with those colors that I sort of like pick in advance. And that, I think, is when I feel like I'm onto something in terms of it feeling like it's all related. Because, you know, when I'm writing 10 songs and they all have to fit together on one work, you know, and I like consistency, so I like them all to match in some way. So I kind of come at writing a record or an album like, okay, what's the story? What's the narrative? Like, what am I feeling? You know, how do I want it to look like? What does it look like, sound like, feel like, smell like? You know, and then I surround myself with those feelings, and then that inspires me to write.
That's literally Renaissance magic. That's cool.
Yeah? Is it?
Yeah. So like Marsilio Ficino would do that, but it would be astrologically based. If he was trying to fix someone's Venus, it'd be surrounded by pretty things and green and flowers and what have you. And it's a way of kind of like activating or overemphasizing that part of what we would call the unconscious now, but he had a Neoplatonic model. Because my follow-up inspiration question was, I think people have an expectation, I mean, I've been asked this, but it's probably the same for you, that the inspiration must come from the same domain. Like, what inspires you? Please only answer using musicians. And it's like, there are musicians, I presume, that inspire you, but I know you're really big on film and that kind of stuff. So this is kind of close to one of the things I wanted to discuss is like, how do we create? And you mentioned like you want an album to be something. I have this kind of really stoner question, which is like, what even is an album? Like, I am
stoned enough to answer that. That's the thing. Well, yeah, I mean, is that the question that we should tackle first?
Like, what is an album? And because it's the question is like inspiration versus what is a creative work. Because if you're writing a book, people want you to say that I was inspired by these writers. But like, I am inspired by film, and I don't know a single writer that doesn't write surrounded by music, which tends to be different each time he or she is actually writing.
Yeah.
And so it's more. It's like a wider, again, slightly stoner question of creativity. And you mentioned that bit about, like, you want an album to be something. So does it land in your head as this idea you can't articulate yet? Or do you kind of, like, start with one song and pull the rest of it up, like, from a rope from your unconscious?
Yeah, it definitely starts with a feeling, you know? It starts with experiences, and because I write from such like a personal point of view, it's hard for me to write. I used to do this more in the past, but more recently, I have to write very personally. It has to come from deep within me first, and so you know, it comes from that feeling and that experience, and then from there, I build this world, like trying to interpret that feeling. Because that's the whole point of art. It's about trying to interpret a feeling, which is so subjective and hard, and you're never going to get it right. But if you can approximate it, and I want to interpret that feeling through music. But why would I find music that sounds like that feeling elsewhere? You know what I mean? It's kind of like if I was inspired by another musician, I would just be like, oh yeah, they did it.
So I'll listen to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes there's like, there's, okay. So I do have I have an anecdote that could be used here. A couple days ago, well, first I should say I'm in the middle of writing my next record, and I've been struggling because these past couple of years have been some of the hardest years of my life, and people think that's easy to put into art until you really realize when you're in the thick of it, you're completely overwhelmed with grief and fear, anxiety, and that transition, and you can't focus on writing or making art or anything. But anyway, trying to digest that all has been really hard, but I've been really working at it and trying to figure out, you know, how do I interpret this feeling? You know, how do I interpret these feelings or these experiences? And what needs to come out of this? And I've been asking those questions more than ever because I feel like there's something within me that needs to come out. And I think that's why I went through a hellish Saturn return, if you will, to get here. And so I've been putting a lot of energy into thinking about how to interpret the feeling. So two different things happened this week when I was alone and had kind of like my own sort of meditative retreat. I was meditating and kind of playing around with visionary stuff. And out of nowhere, I felt like I fell into this cave. And the cave was dripping and dark and cold, and it felt very real, but also very terrifying. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. And then this woman appeared from the blackness, and she had a beautiful body, but it was kind of beastly. And then her face was just like this morphing like lion face. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm just messing around, you know." But to me, she felt like she was the woman. She was like the original woman. In my mind, she felt like she harnessed and encompassed womanhood and feminine power. And it made me feel like, shit, that is what I'm feeling inside that needs to come out. How do I bring that out? And then I see her and then I want to be her, you know? And so that happened. And then a couple of days later, I was listening to the new Pharmacon record, who's my friend. She has a new record coming out, and I listened to it, and it's beautiful, and it's very analog. And I just thought I feel like this record needs to be analog. It, you know what I mean? Like it struck me there. It had nothing to do with what her songs were or what it sounded like. It was just like the fact that it was all analog gear. I was like, that feels like feminine in this way that I'm feeling, you know? So, you know, so those are two births of inspiration that happened, and they're happening before then I'll go down into the studio and try to interpret that. Yeah, so
that's cool.
Anyway.
It's funny you mentioned not funny, haha, but funny you mentioned that people expect when you go through a trauma or a series of traumas, as you did, you know, working on the previous album, Makobi, that this would be like, I can just total off now and write a song or you know, compose a poem or whatever creative thing people happen to do. And Akovi kind of feels like, to me, and I love this about it, but it feels like being washed up, exhausted on a beach, like washed up from like an oceanic emotional storm. It's astonishing as this kind of thing, but it does, when trauma happens to you, it's almost like it needs to compost, like it needs to turn itself into soil from which things can grow. It's not like an instant delivery. So it was obviously towards the end, because Akovi came out, it's 2019 now, so a couple of years ago, like presumably there's more work on the way, but I really, and it's weird when we're talking about trauma and what albums and music are for. There is something, this is another kind of stoner question, like, why does it work? So why does me listening to, say, like walking along the beach listening to Akovi, why does your expression of like deep and profound anguish make me feel better? Like, like what's going on there? Like, why? This is a metaphysical question, because in a way it shouldn't, but it does. Like, I find that in combination with like the cold oceanic winds and whatever, if there's stuff going on in the back of my head, or I come away from that feeling so much better, and I'm actually listening to some like pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, good question. I don't know. But I mean, I think like I can't answer that as a listener of the music, but as the maker, I think that's the power of music, and that's what makes me so sort of hell-bent on that medium, is because it is this such like an unconscious sublime way to express yourself, but at the same time it's like you have this radio, this two-way radio or something, and you hear a person on the other end being like, "Is anyone out there? Is anyone out there?" And then you respond, and you're like, I'm out here too, you know. And so I think it's just that ability of being able to feel plucked from the abyss and feel like, oh, okay, you know, grief is my grief is shared, your grief is shared. It's this communal sort of like bloodletting of our trauma or our pain or our suffering, and you know, we both need it. You know, it's a symbiotic ecosystem. It's two things that need each other. I think I listen to music to be felt, and I make music to be felt and to be heard and understood, you know. So I think that's the beauty of music, is that just hearing someone else validate your own struggles makes you feel less alone and better. At least that's how it makes me feel when I listen to music, sad music or something.
Yeah. Well, because like my favorite Well, it actually shifts, but at the moment, my favorite sort of a Covey track or song is Ash to Bone. I like it because it's witchy and almost like grimoire in its motifs. And as I'm kind of like putting together the questions for the show, I went and actually look at what you said about it, which is I didn't realize it was about that the sort of isolated feeling of despair or depression, and that kind of like almost increasing sense of panic as you realize you move further and further into depression and become less and less understood, which is actually one of the things you would need to assist in overcoming depression. And that was so eerie because that is, I would have an anxiety response, like my deepest depression would have been in 2008 when I first moved to London. And that was my feeling at the time. I honestly felt like I was kind of slowly sinking in like a horizontal ocean backwards away from everyone around me. And I'm like, holy shit. So the song, I didn't realize at the time, but like the track on the album I like the best is in fact the one that I have the most personal resonance with. And I was not even consciously aware of it at the time.
Oh, that's good. That means that something was communicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's
something was successful there.
And it's an argument for music being a very specific delivery mechanism, because I kind of absorbed that medicine without even realizing, you know?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That makes me feel good. Thank you.
Can we widen this out to, because I'm very interested in other creatives' creative process and so on. Can we widen out some of the things we've been talking about? Oh, no, I'll do this question first because then we'll tee it up. Did Zola Jesus land in your head fully formed?
I mean, it was fully formed at the time that I made it of what it was then, you know?
Yeah, cool. But it's its own
project
thing, so it develops and what have you.
Yeah. Yeah. It grows and shifts. I mean, it's really just me, but it's that consolidated version of me or whatever. Yeah.
It's because it comes with, I mean, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. There's one of the things that you're so strong at is the use of visual presentation. And is that a Zola Jesus thing, or did your kind of like ritual skills with visual presentation kind of summon Zola Jesus?
Yeah, that was completely that's been something that's just been part of my drive in terms of how I put the thing out there that I'm making. That's part of it, you know, it feels to me part of it, because it's just this other opportunity to try to interpret the feeling. So I think that's always been a pretty strong part of it.
Do you think that's underemphasized? Because you're really good at it. But like, do you think that's an underemphasized component of not just music, but any creative process is in theory a way of either understanding or being in the world, and that should, for people who have, you know, eyesight, which isn't everyone, but whatever, there's an opportunity for expression or contact in how you are and what you do to your body in the world. And do you think that's like, as creatives, are we generally good at it? Do you know what I mean?
You mean doing more multidisciplinary interpretation of creative expression?
But also just how you look. Like, and I don't mean physicals, obviously. I mean, like, how you present present is too shallow a word. How you have an opportunity on a daily basis to be visual in the world in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I'm going at. Like, is that a undeveloped creative muscle in your observation?
I think so. I mean, I think that's something that, and again, undeveloped creative muscle within creatives or within everybody.
Yeah, well, definitely within it. Well, this is, so the way I asked the Zola Jesus question first is I want to kind of like wind up the show by having discussion, like the advice question for creatives. But I think I think the way in is like, particularly if people are starting out on that journey, are they missing an opportunity for self-exploration and self-expression by not sitting with this sort of visual, like visual representation or presentation of their own bodies? Right.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think that's the first place people usually start being creative. And that's where I started. As a child, I would change my clothes like 20 times a day, just constantly trying to put outfits on that would make me be a different character and things like that. Just, it's just a way to, like anything artistic, I think art is an attempt to materialize or externalize your idea of what is beautiful or what is, healing, or what the world is. It's your ideal. And so to wear that, to feel that, to present that, to externalize and internalize that like was always a part of me since I was a kid. And I think it's a part of everybody. It's just about how much they allow themselves to connect with their own sense of taste, because that taste is coming from so much more than just, I like this, I don't like that. It's like, why do you like that? It reminds you of your grandmother. You know what I mean? There's this whole story and narrative within just the choices you make on a daily basis, no matter who you are or what you're, whether you're an artist or not. And that's beautiful, because then it strengthens and ritualizes your connection to your place in the world and your place within your history. And it just gives you so much more, I think, inner strength. I don't know.
No, that's perfect. It didn't really occur to me that way, that it's the opportunity for additional touch points of who you are, where you come from, and almost like a daily reminder of you that you like the things that you like. Like I'm interested in this because or even maybe there's a because, maybe there isn't, but it's a ritual remembrance, a daily ritual remembrance of the things that make you you. And I think that's what I was looking for. Like the word, how you present and visual presentation and all that were all seem to surface. And when I look at how in some of your film clips or just various different places where I've seen images of you, I'm like, nah, she's playing a deeper game, so I'm going to ask her that question, and I think it's true. I think there's that. I like the idea of it being, a daily opportunity for multiple touch points, and I remember this at remember is the word I was going for. When it was at university, I had a lecturer who kind of broke the word remember down into remember, as in on a daily basis, you kind of put yourself together limb by limb by limb, and there's something about that there is an opportunity or an invitation to get quote unquote better at that for like the general enrichment of your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just also having that consideration or allowing yourself to have those preferences or to make those decisions for yourself and how you present yourself. It's really empowering, and it builds confidence, and it also builds your inner character of like, I think everyone, at least when I will get into, I'm into this style of clothing, or I'm into this visual thing, it's all about how does it make me feel? Like, I like wearing things that make me feel powerful and strong, because I'm a 5 foot tall woman, who's like 30, and you know what I mean? I feel very like vulnerable. My whole life, I felt so vulnerable and so scared. And so I like to wear things that make me feel my strength and my power, because then it reminds me when I look in the mirror, I can be reminded of that strength and not of my vulnerability. So I think it's like a really healing aspect of just, and great opportunity for people to just have that, as a little bit of medicine for their heart.
Oh, that's sweet. That's good. Should we? That's also an overlap to where, where we should finish up the final discussion around advice. Like, is that actually really good initial advice for people who are either beginning creatively or even stuck creatively, which is essentially remember yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Remember yourself, and also dream, just dream. I love, whenever I'm stuck creatively, I go, well, what do I want to see in the world? What do I want to hear? What do I feel that I want to be understood, and by others, and just having those inclinations and doing that self-reflection and self-analysis, whether you're spelunking deep down into the caverns of your like trauma in prehistory, or you're just asking yourself, do I like this shirt or that one? Do I like this color or that one? And and building out who you are and understanding who you are from every aspect of it, because that's what makes us sort of like, that's what makes me feel empowered and feel in touch with myself, is just knowing myself and then being able to present that and be like, you know, I feel good, I feel whole, I feel on the right path, you know.
That's excellent. I love it. Well, I mean, you did hint at an upcoming album. I'm not that surprised. I'm looking forward to it. But for people in between now and then, who want to know more about your good self, Nika, where do they go? What do they do? That kind of thing.
Yeah, you can go to the computer. And and then you can on the internet you can search for ZolaJesus.com. I got the Twitter.com/ZolaJesus, the Instagram.com/ZolaJesus. I've got, basically, if you go to a website and tap and write /ZolaJesus, except Pornhub, I'm hoping there's nothing there, but all the other ones.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Insta, Twitter, Patreon, ZolaJesus.com, all that kind of stuff, and of course that will be in the show notes. And this is like, it's a dangerous question to end on because it's so personal. But do you want to give, like, where should people start if they haven't heard anything of yours before? And I know that's like a real dick question, but I want to see what you say.
I would say start with my last record, because all art is like this continuum, but it's also, this is what I do when I'm listening to somebody's music for the first time. I listen to the first thing they've ever put out and the last thing they've ever put out. And then I see where the growth is. And I think that would be really interesting. Like, Okovi, and then maybe the Spoils, which I put out in 2009, and then you can see I was slowly just making a circle back.
Yeah, I was going to say that. But I think, I was going to say, it is a circle back if you do it that way. It's almost like if you go Okovi plus Editions, then Tiger, you will be in that, when we're talking about, well, who am I going to disappoint? But then
pick a record.
Yeah, I think if you're like, you're right, though. If you vibe with Okovi and Okovi Editions, I think people who are into that should keep their eye on you. Put it that way.
Yeah.
Nice one. Well,
definitely.
This is a super fun conversation. I've, as I said, I encountered Tiger. I had some cool friends in London, so I encountered Tiger when that came out, and that was really fun driving music. And Okovi has been brilliant. The last couple of years, now that I'm in like this kind of cold, goth walking Heathcliff environment, and it was just perfect for it. And knowing that you'd move back into, the woods, I'm like, I'm going to have a really good chat with Nika. And I did. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. It's an honor.
Well, that was super fun for me. And as I was editing the show, it occurred to me there is a question being begged around who gets co-credit on a creative piece in an animist cosmology. So when you move past being quote-unquote merely inspired by your surroundings, right, to a point where something can only be made on and with certain places, are we in a co-credit world then? And also, relatedly, what creativity across domains looks like from this perspective as well. How does, inspiration work if you're no longer trapped by that dumb Neil Gaiman idea that you exclusively make up your stories or songs or whatever in your head? These are open questions, by the way. They're not, homework questions with correct answers or something. When trying to talk through modes of being that are pre-literate, or at least haven't been spoken in our languages for millennia, it gets tough, hence open questions, but also language challenges. So, for instance, the language Nika and I used around visual presentation still retains a surfaceness and even a ghost in the machine essentialism that is out of step with a post-materialist ontology. And in the short term, at least, it requires this sort of wordy precision language. And that can sometimes sound a little clunky, but I view it sort of like training wheels. we use them until we no longer need to use them. Because otherwise, just kind of nodding along and using older terms for what we think is a more satisfactory, description. If we use older terms from that outdated materialism, naturalism, then it risks tipping us back into the way of thinking we are trying to climb out of. And so in that sense, I stick close to Pete Carroll's chaos magic axiom that precise words beget precise thoughts, not the other way around. So let's take an example that relates to the process unsatisfyingly called visual representation. Take mask work. What do you think is going on with mask work in a Western context and in, say, a shamanic, Siberian specifically context, right? We know it's beneficial in a Western therapeutic context. And how or why do you think that is on a personal basis? And is the same thing, maybe just at a different level of intensity, who knows, going on in a Siberian or New Guinean or whatever ritual context that's outside the Anglosphere, right? Have you split these mask processes as being somehow different in your head? And should you? And once you've solved that to your own satisfaction, once you've kind of folded them into not the same thing, but once you folded them into your own satisfaction of how you validate truth and how things look, really, in the world, what's going on when you get dressed in the morning to do the school run then? Is there more you can be doing, or at least thinking, with this process? Like I said, open questions. And that's the show for this week. If this sort of jibber-jabber is your jam, please do subscribe on YouTube or in your favorite podcatcher. The tarot course has officially started last night, so if you've been meaning to become a premium member, now's an excellent time. runesoup.com/members. Speaking of jams, check out the show notes to find out more about and from Zola Jesus. And find me eternally, constantly, on Twitter, where I am Gordon, GORDON_White, WHITE. Until next time.
So big, my last hope that this stream will carry me through. But history is a long road, and truth can make him mute. If it doesn't make you wiser, doesn't make you stronger, doesn't make you live a little bit, what are you doing? Listen, babe, my remorse that extremes kept me abused. The mystery is a long recourse, and time can make it new. If it doesn't make you wiser, doesn't make you stronger, doesn't make you live a little bit, what are you doing? Doesn't make you wiser, doesn't make you stronger, doesn't make you live a little bit, what are you doing? In these parted days, I am losing all my senses. In this timeless days, I can barely see through. In this crowded space, I am losing all my senses. In this drowned out phase, I can make you